Natalia Chen had been looking forward to this weekend for months. Work had been draining her energy, and all she wanted was 3 days of silence in a cabin surrounded by pine trees and mountain air. She packed her car with books, coffee, and enough snacks to last a week. The drive took nearly 4 hours, winding up narrow roads that seemed to disappear into the clouds. When she finally pulled up to the cabin, her heart sank. There was already a car parked outside. She grabbed her phone and checked the rental confirmation 3 times. This was definitely the right place. The cabin matched the photos perfectly, with its stone chimney and wraparound porch. But that black SUV sitting in the driveway told her something had gone terribly wrong. Natalia stepped out of her car just as the cabin door opened. A tall man walked out, and her stomach dropped even further when she recognized him. Derek Matthews stood on the porch with a coffee mug in his hand, looking just as surprised to see her. They stared at each other for a long moment. Derek had been her ex-boyfriend's closest friend, the guy who was always around during the worst year of her life. She hadn't seen him in almost 2 years, not since the breakup that ended everything. He looked different now, with longer hair and a beard that made him seem older, but those eyes were the same. Always watching. Always judging. "You've got to be kidding me," Natalia said, walking toward the porch with her bag over her shoulder. "What are you doing here?" Derek set his mug down on the railing. "I booked this place 3 weeks ago. What are you doing here?" "I booked it 2 months ago," she shot back, pulling out her phone to show him the confirmation email. Derek did the same, and they compared screenshots like lawyers presenting evidence. The rental company had definitely messed up. Both confirmations were legitimate, both paid in full, both for the exact same weekend. Derek ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "Look, I drove 4 hours to get here. I'm not leaving." "Neither am I," Natalia said firmly. "I need this break more than you know." They stood there in a stubborn standoff, neither willing to back down. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying the smell of rain and causing the trees to sway. Natalia glanced at the sky and noticed how dark it had gotten. The clouds were rolling in fast, thick, and gray like smoke. Derek noticed too. "We should call the rental company," he said, already pulling out his phone. But when he tried, the call wouldn't go through. Natalia tried next, with the same result. The signal up here had always been weak, and now it seemed to be gone completely. Then both their phones buzzed at the same time. A severe weather alert flashed across the screens. A major storm was moving into the area faster than predicted. Flash flood warnings were in effect. All mountain roads would be closed within the hour. Residents and visitors were advised to shelter in place immediately. Natalia looked at Derek, and for the first time, she saw worry in his expression. "The road up here floods easy," he said quietly. "If we try to leave now, we might not make it down." She knew he was right. The drive up had shown her how narrow those roads were, how close to the edge they ran. One good rainfall could turn them into rivers. She looked at the cabin, then back at Derek. The situation was clear. They were stuck here together whether they liked it or not. "Fine," Natalia said, though the word felt heavy in her mouth. "But I'm taking the bedroom." "There are 2 bedrooms," Derek replied. "You can have whichever one you want." She grabbed her bags from the car as the first drops of rain began to fall. They were light at first, just a gentle tap-tap-tap on the roof of her car. But within minutes, the sky opened up completely. Rain poured down in sheets, so thick she could barely see the trees at the edge of the property. Thunder rolled across the mountains, deep and threatening. Inside the cabin, Natalia claimed the bedroom on the left, while Derek stayed in the one on the right. She unpacked slowly, trying not to think about how weird this situation was. Of all the people to get stuck with, it had to be him. Derek had always made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite explain. He'd been polite enough when they were around each other, but there was always something in the way he looked at her, like he saw too much, like he knew things about her she didn't want anyone to know. The afternoon dragged on with both of them staying in their separate spaces. Natalia tried to read, but she couldn't focus. The storm kept getting worse. Wind rattled the windows, and rain hammered against the roof, like fists, demanding to be let in. She heard Derek moving around in the other room, probably feeling just as trapped as she did. By evening, the power started to flicker. The lights would go out for a few seconds, then come back on, then go out again. Natalia knew what was coming. When the cabin finally went dark and stayed dark, she wasn't surprised. She fumbled for her phone and used its flashlight to find her way to the main room. Derek was already there, kneeling by the fireplace with kindling in his hands. "There's firewood on the porch," he said without looking at her. "We're going to need it." They worked together in silence, bringing in logs and stacking them by the hearth. Derek got the fire going while Natalia found candles in the kitchen cabinets. Soon the room was filled with warm, flickering light. It should have felt cozy. But instead, it felt strange, intimate in a way that made Natalia's skin prickle. They sat on opposite sides of the room, each pretending to be occupied with their phones even though there was no signal and limited battery. The storm showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it was getting worse. Natalia pulled a blanket around her shoulders and stared into the fire, wondering how she was going to survive the next few days trapped here with someone who reminded her of everything she wanted to forget. The first night passed in uncomfortable silence. Natalia barely slept, listening to the storm rage outside and the old cabin creak under the weight of wind and rain. When morning finally came, gray light filtered through the windows, but the rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it seemed heavier. She got up and found Derek already in the kitchen, making coffee on a small camping stove he must have brought with him. "Morning," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. He poured her a cup without asking if she wanted one. Natalia accepted it because the cabin was cold, and her breath came out in small clouds. The fire had died during the night, and the temperature had dropped significantly. "We should check the news," Natalia said, trying to get a signal on her phone. She walked around the cabin holding it up at different angles, but nothing worked. Derek tried his phone too, with the same frustrating result. They were completely cut off. "The radio," Derek said suddenly, pointing to an old transistor radio sitting on a shelf. He turned it on and adjusted the dial until a crackling voice came through. The news wasn't good. The storm had caused flooding throughout the region. Multiple roads were washed out. Power lines were down. Emergency services were stretched thin, dealing with evacuations in the valley. People in higher elevations were told to stay put and wait it out. Natalia set her coffee down and walked to the window. Water ran down the glass in rivers. She could barely see the trees through the downpour. The road they'd both driven up was probably underwater by now. They really were stuck here. "How long do you think?" she asked quietly. Derek shrugged. 2 days, maybe 3. Depends on when it stops raining and how fast the water goes down. 2 or 3 more days trapped with him. Natalia felt her chest tighten. She'd come here to escape stress, not to live through this bizarre nightmare. She turned away from the window and found Derek watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "We should talk about this," he said finally. "We can't just ignore each other for 3 days. "Why not?" Natalia shot back. "We ignored each other for 2 years just fine." Something flickered across Derek's face. Hurt, maybe, or anger. "That was your choice, not mine." "My choice?" Natalia felt her temper rising. "You were his best friend. You defended everything he did, even when he was completely wrong." Derek stood up, his jaw tight. "I never defended what he did to you. Not once. But you never stuck around long enough to hear my side of things. You just disappeared. Because I couldn't be around people who reminded me of him," Natalia said, her voice louder now. "Every time I saw you, all I could think about was how you encouraged his reckless behavior. The drinking, the late nights, the way he prioritized everyone except me." "That's not fair," Derek said, his voice rising to match hers. "I told him he was messing up, multiple times, but he didn't listen to me any more than he listened to you." They stood there on opposite sides of the room, tension crackling between them like electricity. Rain pounded against the roof, filling the silence that followed. Natalia wanted to say more, to let out all the resentment she'd been carrying for 2 years. But looking at Derek's face, she saw something she hadn't expected. Pain. Real, genuine pain. "He lost you because of his own choices," Derek said quietly. "But I lost a friend too. He spiraled after you left, and I couldn't pull him out of it. Don't think I don't know what my loyalty cost me." Natalia felt her anger deflate slightly. She'd never thought about it from Derek's perspective. How watching his best friend self-destruct must have felt, how being caught in the middle must have torn him apart. "I didn't know it got worse," she admitted, sitting down on the couch. Derek sat too, keeping distance between them. "He's doing better now. Finally got help. But it took hitting rock bottom first." He paused, staring into the cold fireplace. "I should have pushed harder. Should have made him see what he was throwing away." "It wasn't your responsibility to fix him," Natalia said softly. "And it wasn't yours either," Derek replied, looking at her directly for the first time. "But we both tried anyway, didn't we?" Something shifted in that moment. The anger that had kept them apart suddenly seemed smaller, less important. They'd both been casualties of someone else's mess, both carrying guilt that didn't really belong to them. The conversation opened a door neither of them had expected. As the day wore on and the storm continued, they talked more. Derek rebuilt the fire, and they sat closer to it, sharing the warmth. He told her about his own struggles over the past 2 years, how he'd thrown himself into work to avoid dealing with the loss of his friendship, how lonely it had been. Natalia found herself opening up too, telling him about the therapy sessions, the nights she'd cried over someone who never deserved her tears, the slow process of learning to trust herself again. Derek listened without judgment, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I always thought you were too good for him," Derek said suddenly, then looked startled, like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. Natalia's heart skipped. "What?" Derek rubbed the back of his neck, uncomfortable. "Nothing. Forget I said anything." "No. Say it." Natalia pressed, leaning forward slightly. He met her eyes, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I thought you were too good for him from the first time I met you. Smart, kind, way more patient than he deserved. I never understood what you saw in him." He paused, and I felt guilty for thinking that, because he was my best friend. The admission hung between them, like a physical thing. Natalia's mind raced, suddenly remembering moments from years ago. The way Derek would watch her at parties. How he'd always seemed uncomfortable when her ex was dismissive toward her. The time he'd offered to drive her home and her ex had gotten strangely jealous. "I noticed you too," Natalia heard herself say. "Back then, the way you'd look at me sometimes. I told myself I was imagining it." Derek's expression shifted, becoming more intense. "You weren't imagining it." The air between them grew thick and heavy. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, and the cabin felt suddenly very small. Natalia knew they were crossing into dangerous territory, but she couldn't seem to stop herself from taking another step forward. Morning brought no relief from the rain. If anything, the storm seemed angrier, more determined. Natalia woke on the couch where she'd fallen asleep the night before, covered with a blanket she didn't remember pulling over herself. Derek must have done it. He was already up, standing by the window with a mug in his hands, watching the water pour down from dark clouds. "Coffee's ready," he said without turning around. His voice sounded tired, like maybe he hadn't slept well either. They moved around the kitchen carefully, hyper-aware of every accidental brush of hands or shoulders in the small space. Something had changed after last night's conversation. The anger was gone, but it had been replaced by something more complicated, something neither of them seemed ready to name. Natalia checked her phone out of habit, even though she knew there'd be no signal. The battery was getting low. Derek's was probably the same. They were running out of firewood too. The pile on the porch was getting smaller, and what remained was soaked through from the rain. Derek had brought in what he could, stacking the wet logs by the fireplace to dry, but it wouldn't be enough if the storm lasted much longer. "I'm going to check the generator," Derek said after breakfast. "Maybe I can get it working." Natalia followed him to the small shed behind the cabin. Rain soaked them both within seconds. The generator was old and clearly hadn't been maintained properly. Derek pulled the cover off and studied the engine while water dripped from his hair. He tried the start cord several times, but nothing happened. "It's dead," he finally said, frustration clear in his voice. "Fuel lines probably clogged, maybe worse. I don't have the tools to fix it." They ran back inside, shivering and dripping water across the floor. Natalia grabbed towels from the bathroom, while Derek rebuilt the fire. The wood was still damp and didn't want to catch. He worked at it patiently, blowing on the embers until finally small flames began to grow. "We need to conserve what we have," Derek said, sitting back on his heels. "The dry wood won't last more than another day, maybe two." The reality of their situation settled over them like a weight. They were cold, running low on supplies, and completely isolated. Natalia wrapped herself in a blanket and sat close to the fire. Derek sat next to her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. "Tell me something," Natalia said, watching the flames dance. "Why did you come up here alone? No girlfriend who wanted to join you?" Derek was quiet for a moment. "There's no girlfriend. Hasn't been anyone serious in a long time." He glanced at her. "What about you?" "Same. I dated a few people after everything, but nothing stuck. I think I was too guarded. Too afraid of getting hurt again." "That's not a bad thing," Derek said. "Being careful with your heart. Maybe. But it's lonely. Maybe. 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 Maybe." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is." They fell into silence. But it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. The fire crackled, and the rain drummed steadily on the roof. Natalia found herself studying Derek's profile in the flickering light. The strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes reflected the flames. She'd spent so much energy avoiding him, refusing to acknowledge what she'd felt even back then. But now, trapped here, with nowhere to run, the truth was getting harder to ignore. "Can I ask you something?" Derek said, breaking into her thoughts. "Sure." "That night at Tyler's birthday party, 3 years ago, you and your ex got into a fight, and you went outside. I found you sitting on the back steps." Natalia remembered. She'd been crying, trying to hide it from everyone inside. Derek had sat down next to her without saying anything, just handed her his jacket because it was cold. "I remember," she said quietly. "You looked at me, and for a second, I thought." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Never mind." "You thought what?" Natalia pressed, turning to face him. Derek met her eyes. "I thought you were going to kiss me. The way you looked at me. It felt like something was about to happen. But then you pulled away and went back inside." Natalia's heart raced. She had wanted to kiss him that night. The realization hit her like a wave. She'd wanted it so badly it scared her. And that's why she'd run. "I was with someone else," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even though it was falling apart, even though I was miserable, I couldn't do that to him." "I know," Derek said. "That's why I didn't try anything. But I thought about it, more than I should have." They were sitting very close now, faces just inches apart. Natalia could see the gold flecks in his eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from him. The cabin suddenly felt very warm, despite the cold rain outside. "Derek," she started, but didn't know how to finish the sentence. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, and she felt that touch all the way down to her toes. "This is complicated," he said softly. "I know. People would judge us. They'd say we betrayed him. I know that too. But I can't stop thinking about you," Derek admitted. "I haven't been able to stop for 3 years." Natalia's breath caught. She knew she should be careful, should think this through. But the fire was warm, and Derek was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, and she was so tired of being careful. "Then stop fighting it," she whispered. The distance between them disappeared. Derek's hand slid into her hair as he pulled her closer. And when their lips finally met, it felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them testing the waters. But then something broke loose. All the years of wanting and denying and pretending suddenly rushing to the surface. Natalia's hands found his shoulders, pulling him closer. Derek's other arm wrapped around her waist, and she could feel his heart pounding against her chest. The blanket fell away as they shifted, and suddenly she was in his lap, his hands on her face, her back, everywhere. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, and Natalia felt like she was burning up from the inside. Then Derek pulled back, breathing hard. "Wait! We should wait!" Natalia tried to catch her breath, her forehead resting against his. "Why?" "Because I don't want this to be just about the storm, about being stuck here with nothing else to do." His hands were still on her waist, holding her like he couldn't quite let go. "I want this to mean something." She pulled back enough to look at him properly. His eyes were dark with want, but there was something else there too. Something that looked like hope mixed with fear. "It already means something," Natalia said, and she knew it was true. They stayed like that for a long moment, tangled together by the fire, listening to the rain and the sound of each other's breathing. Both of them, knowing they'd just crossed a line they could never uncross. Natalia woke wrapped in warmth she hadn't felt in years. Sometime during the night, she and Derek had fallen asleep on the couch together. Her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. The fire had burned down to embers, and pale gray light filtered through the windows. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle. No longer the violent downpour that had trapped them here. She felt Derek wake beneath her, his breathing changing. His hand moved slowly up and down her arm, and she wondered if he was nervous about how this morning would go. Everything felt different in daylight, clearer, more real. "Hey," he said quietly. Natalia lifted her head to look at him. His hair was messy, sticking up in odd directions, and there were creases on his face from the couch cushions. He looked vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him before. "Hey," she replied, suddenly unsure of what came next. They untangled themselves slowly, both stiff from sleeping on the small couch. Derek went to rebuild the fire, while Natalia started coffee. They moved around each other in a dance that was becoming familiar, but now there was an added layer of awareness. Every glance felt loaded with meaning. Every accidental touch sent electricity through her. The coffee situation was getting critical. They were down to their last few scoops. The food wasn't much better. Some crackers, half a jar of peanut butter, 2 cans of soup. If the storm didn't break soon, they'd be in trouble. "We should ration what's left," Derek said, echoing her thoughts. He was standing by the counter, looking at their meager supplies spread out before them. Natalia came up beside him. "How long do you think we have?" 2 days of food, maybe. Less if we want to eat properly." She felt his tension, the worry he was trying to hide. Without thinking about it, she reached for his hand. His fingers immediately laced through hers, holding tight. "We'll be okay," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Derek pulled her closer, wrapping both arms around her. She rested her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Steady and strong. They stood like that for a while, taking comfort in each other's presence. When they finally pulled apart, Derek kept hold of her hand. "I need to say something." "Okay. Last night wasn't just about being stuck here for me. I meant what I said. I've thought about you for years. Wondered what might have happened if circumstances had been different." He paused, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand. "I don't want this to end when the storm does." Natalia's chest felt tight. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to try this for real. When we get back to the city, I want to take you to dinner. I want to see where this goes." His eyes searched hers. "If that's what you want too." She thought about their lives back home. The mutual friends who would have opinions. The ex who would definitely hear about it. The whispers and judgment that would follow them. It would be complicated and messy and probably painful. But looking at Derek now, feeling the way her heart raced when he was near, Natalia realized she didn't care about any of that. "Yes," she said simply. "That's what I want too." The smile that spread across Derek's face was worth everything. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, like a promise being sealed. When they broke apart, both were smiling. They spent the morning together, talking about everything and nothing. Derek told her about his work, the projects he was excited about, the dreams he'd put on hold. Natalia shared her plans for the future, things she'd never told anyone before. It felt easy, natural, like they'd been having these conversations for years. Around noon, the cabin grew cold again. They were running desperately low on dry firewood. Derek eyed the damp logs he'd brought in, clearly doing calculations in his head. "I'm going to try burning some of the wet wood," he said. "Mix it with what little dry stuff we have left. It won't burn well, but it's better than freezing." While he worked on that, Natalia explored the cabin more thoroughly, looking for anything useful. In a closet, she found extra blankets and a sleeping bag. In the kitchen, she discovered a box of hot chocolate mix tucked behind some old dishes. Small victories, but they felt huge given the circumstances. The wet wood smoked terribly, making their eyes water. They had to crack a window despite the cold, letting in the damp air. But at least there was some heat. They huddled together under the blankets, sharing the last of the peanut butter on crackers. "Fancy lunch?" Derek joked, holding up his cracker like it was gourmet food. 5 stars. Natalia played along. "Would definitely recommend." They laughed, and it felt good. Natural. Like this was exactly where they were supposed to be. As afternoon faded to evening, Natalia noticed Derek kept glancing at her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. Finally, she called him on it. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" He set down the cup of water he'd been drinking. "Like what?" "Like you're trying to memorize my face." Derek was quiet for a moment, then admitted, "Because I'm afraid this is a dream. That I'll wake up, and you'll still hate me. And none of this will be real." Natalia moved closer, placing her hand on his cheek. "I never hated you. I was just scared of what I felt when you were around. And now? Now, I'm still scared," she admitted. "But I'm more scared of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering, what if?" Derek pulled her into his lap, and this time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, no pulling back. His hands moved under her sweater, warm against her skin, and she shivered but not from cold. 3 days of tension and wanting finally broke free. "Are you sure?" Derek asked, his voice rough, giving her one last chance to stop this. Natalia answered by kissing him harder, her fingers working at the buttons of his shirt. They moved from the couch to the bedroom, leaving a trail of clothes behind them. The room was cold, but they didn't notice. Under the blankets, wrapped around each other, they created their own heat. Later, lying in the darkness with Derek's arm around her, and rain pattering softly on the roof, Natalia felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Contentment, like all the broken pieces of herself, were finally fitting back together. "What are you thinking?" Derek asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm glad the rental company messed up." She felt him smile against her hair. "Yeah, me too." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time since arriving at the cabin, Natalia wasn't worried about the storm or being trapped. She was exactly where she wanted to be. Natalia opened her eyes to sunlight. Real, actual sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. She sat up quickly, disturbing Derek beside her. He woke with a start, then saw what she was seeing. The rain had stopped. Through the window, they could see blue sky breaking through the clouds. They scrambled out of bed, pulling on clothes and rushing to the main room. The view from the front windows confirmed it. The storm was over. Water still dripped from the trees and the ground was saturated, but the worst had passed. The radio crackled to life when Derek turned it on. Roads were being cleared. Emergency services were assessing damage. People could start heading home by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. The word hung between them like a weight. Their time here was ending. The bubble they'd been living in for 4 days was about to burst. Natalia walked to the window, arms wrapped around herself. She felt Derek come up behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "We go home," he said. "And we figure this out. People are going to talk. Let them. Natalia turned to face him. Your friend. My ex. He's going to find out. He'll think we were doing this behind his back all along. Derek's jaw tightened. He doesn't get a say in our lives anymore. He lost that right when he lost you. And I stopped owing him loyalty when he stopped being the person I thought he was. But it'll hurt him. Maybe, Derek acknowledged. But we can't live our lives worried about hurting someone who never worried about hurting us. She knew he was right. But it didn't make it easier. Our friends will choose sides. Then we'll find out who our real friends are. Derek cupped her face in his hands. I'm not saying it'll be easy. It'll probably be messy and uncomfortable and complicated, but I meant what I said. I want to try this for real. What if it doesn't work? Natalia asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if we get back to normal life and realize this was just about the storm? About being stuck together with nothing else to distract us? Then at least we'll know, Derek said. But I don't think that's what this is. Do you? Natalia thought about the conversations they'd had, the way Derek listened when she talked, how safe she felt in his arms. This wasn't just physical attraction or convenience, it was real. No, she admitted. I don't think that's what this is. They spent their last day in the cabin preparing to leave. Derek checked the road conditions on the radio while Natalia cleaned up and packed. They rationed out the last of their food, joking about the fancy restaurant Derek promised to take her to once they got home. As evening approached, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air smelled fresh after the rain, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear water rushing down the mountain. I'm going to miss this place, Natalia said, leaning against Derek's shoulder. We could come back, he suggested. Book it properly this time. Together. She smiled at the thought. I'd like that. Derek pulled out his phone. The signal was back, weak but there. Messages started flooding in. Friends and family worried about the storm, asking if he was okay. Natalia's phone came alive too with the same concerned messages. They both ignored them for now. Not ready to let the real world intrude yet. We should probably figure out what we're going to tell people, Derek said. The truth. Natalia decided. That we were both here. That we talked. That something changed. We don't owe anyone more details than that. And when they ask if we're together, Natalia thought about it, then took Derek's hand in hers. We tell them we're figuring it out. That we're taking it one day at a time. I can work with that, Derek said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. They stayed outside until the stars came out, bright and clear now that the clouds were gone. Tomorrow, they'd drive down the mountain separately, back to their individual lives, but Derek had promised to call her that evening. They'd made plans for dinner the following weekend. Small steps forward into unknown territory. When they finally went inside, Natalia felt the weight of reality settling over her. In the morning, she'd have to face questions and judgment, and all the complicated emotions that came with starting something with someone she was never supposed to want. But looking at Derek across the cabin, seeing the way he smiled at her like she was something precious, she knew it would be worth it. They spent their last night together in the cabin, no longer strangers or enemies, but two people who'd found something unexpected in the middle of a storm. When Natalia fell asleep in Derek's arms, she didn't dream of the past or worry about the future. She just felt grateful for the rain that had locked them in and given them the time to stop running from what they'd been fighting for years. Morning came too soon. They loaded their cars in silence, both putting off the inevitable goodbye. When everything was packed, they stood in the driveway, keys in hand, neither wanting to be the first to leave. I'll call you tonight, Derek promised, pulling her close. You better, Natalia said, her arms tight around his waist. They kissed one more time, long and slow, trying to hold on to the feeling of being in their own private world just a little longer. When they finally pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. See you soon, Derek said. Soon, Natalia agreed. She got in her car and started the engine. Through the rearview mirror, she watched Derek do the same. They drove down the mountain in a slow convoy, Derek's car following hers. At the bottom, where the road split, they'd go their separate ways, but as Natalia navigated the winding road, she felt lighter than she had in years. The storm had washed away more than just dirt and debris. It had cleared away old resentments, false loyalties, and fear. What remained was simple and true. Two people who'd finally stopped fighting the heat between them and discovered something worth holding on to. Her phone buzzed with a text. She waited until she reached a straight stretch of road to glance at it. Derek's message was simple. Already counting the hours until I see you again. Natalia smiled, her heart full, and typed back, "Me too." The rain was over, but their story was just beginning.